With the patient open, click the diagnosis icon to enter the patient's diagnosis. Here you will have a blank screen until you click the New button up top. Once you click the New button, you will see the grid to enter the ICD-10 codes for the patient. There are several methods for entering ICD-10 codes. You can enter them by just going into the ICD-10 column and typing them, and then hitting enter. Or you may look up a code by typing in any of the search fields and hitting enter to get a list of the diagnoses that apply. From here, you can double click on a diagnosis to assign them to the patient. Additionally, there's the ICD-10 common codes. These are a list of common ICD-10 codes for chiropractic, and they're broken down by several different groups: headache, cervical, thoracic, etc. Click the plus sign for that group to see the diagnoses that are in that area, and double click on the diagnosis to assign that to the patient. Thirdly, you can create your own patterns similar to the common codes. To do this, you go up on top to Tools, Catalogs, Diagnoses, ICD-10. This will bring up the window to create your patterns. Click the New Pattern icon in the lower left-hand corner and give the pattern a name. And then hit Enter. Once you've entered the diagnosis pattern name, choose the diagnoses from the column on the right that apply to that group. For example, you might type in the lookup M95 to find all of the N95 diagnoses, and then highlight the one you want and choose the arrow pointing to the left to add it to that group. Continue doing that until you've put all the diagnoses in the group. You will notice there is a provider drop-down. In the drop-down, you can choose the provider associated with this diagnosis set. However, if there is only one provider, or if all of the providers are treating the same symptoms, it's recommended that you choose all instead of a specific provider. The reason for this is if you assign the diagnosis set to one provider and another provider enters a transaction for that patient, that diagnosis set will not be enforced for the other provider. So all is the best way to go unless you have someone treating with different diagnoses. The diagnosis visitometer defaults to 30 days from today. This is just a pop-up reminder to let you know that you might need to re-evaluate your diagnosis. You can change this date to any date of your choosing or delete it altogether if you do not want the pop-up. The visits allowed are the number of visits that are allowed for this particular diagnosis. In some cases, you may only have 10 visits. Or set the number of visits, and the visitometer will track both the expiration date and the visits allowed and let you know which one comes first. Once you're completed with your diagnosis, click the Save icon to save your diagnosis. The diagnosis set will be assigned today's date and time. If the patient's first visit was prior to today, you would want to set the date to the date of the first visit. To do this, click the red pencil on the right, choose the appropriate date, click the pumpkin to set that for midnight, and then click the green check mark, and then click Save again to save that diagnosis for that date. At some time, you will need to edit the diagnosis or create a new diagnosis set. Since diagnosis sets are date sensitive, you will want to create another set with a different date. There are two options for this. One would be to clone the existing diagnosis set and make any necessary changes, or create a new diagnosis set. To clone an existing diagnosis, click the Clone Diagnosis button on top. You will get a window with the existing diagnosis set in it. Make any necessary changes, such as adding a new diagnosis or deleting existing diagnoses. To delete a single ICD code, click on the code and then click the Delete ICD code up on top. To add a new diagnosis, go to the next empty line in the ICD-10 column and enter the new ICD-10 code. Continue until you're finished making the necessary changes. Then click Save. Again, the set will be saved with today's date and time. Change the date and time if necessary, as explained earlier. To add a completely new diagnosis set, click the New button on top and proceed the same way as you did for the initial diagnosis. Once you're finished with your diagnosis, you can close that window or move on to one of the other windows.